undocumented Latino is placed in a position of non-existence where physical persons not registered. Policy is always inaccessible to because registering puts us at a risk of deportation. That's Perry and Mark 3. In the speech of non-existent persons registering means not accruing accounts when reside in hope they're not the undocumented, not officially here. That attempt to prove that they have been present unregistered persons that keep after support persons fall short of the requirements of equity for undocumented temporal world. The rights work is denied. The social ties are not recognized. The undocumented piece of arbitrary or can be separated from the relatives, can be deported, spouse, and children cannot be full slaves of person non-existence. It's illegality. Working, traveling, and driving become a listen non-existence referred to as another place become an underground. Outside inequalities find their way to the classroom manifest into physical violence. Our theory requires direct analysis of what happens to be and many more likely. That's Article 14 linguistic oppression, 1,000 direct side of general and oppression. The most study made of students immigrated from Mexico integrated into high schools and extremely negative felt unwelcome space search to isolate students from basic cultures. The space search basic cultures and students are not being able to speak and will put down by the peers. Most legal instrument oppression is in the education English movement condition English for speaking native language physically and psychologically. Harsh punishment still exists, but English is strictly enforced on my language. And debate is about performance. Speech act is a performative act or effective attachment to an institution, forcing debaters to confront their performance as a method of unsettling biases and a prerequisite to policy. That's Chambers 2013. The laws and perform composed linguistic utterances of the moon describe the world because produce and doing the very uncertain description performance ancient law produce subjects that perform to put from the utterance, although legal discourse misconduct factual gender production social media undecidability between performance structure condition structures and I'm excited people currently comes to feel powerful because of the state is not forces of cities people into willing to mission police officers hey avail her versus drum turns on because it's subject of the law and the advocacy from the misuse of conscience that embracing thirds in the base of resolution. The actor is a judge who adopts a singular action of misuse a model of teaching and learning and the borderlands is inevitable. The only question during survival that's Rodriguez no love in the capacity meaning deeper or SSS subjugation left without immersive faculty emerging on social condition under these conditions knowledge is part of the self liberation of condition to limit species in the world of borders and the strategic founders essentially dealing with colonial countries with their nursing colony out of the heritage is not represented by consultation peaceful like European paradigm and the misuse of presentation learning sells everything in the theory violation of the word against the fosters methods of social participation granting educational space and skills over high school debates around the country are already doing this and it works. That's Mira 20 next vernacular and the same and the Latina permitted so the schools of society the rules associated with literacy and object but in fact social cultural content creating post and material metaphorical concept upload the paradigm so that critical examination part of education policy maker research to do so continue to be sensitive to up the painful humbling processing the positive instructions to service having so much realizing the leadership because acknowledge that those we're not the only one way to be open the floodgates transform literacy honor the linguistic heritage the private path of branching models democratic dialogue community building the beyond division literacy is crucial able playing during divine democracy and voices are welcoming new various parts of encourage members to reach voices after challenges of the 21st century to control burdens society pushing all the experience possible to come to a most season presentation and insurance-catered development of Mrs. Causes. This is not a one-and-done event. That's Fagali. Alone the process of which means to take hold, take up intercommunities, Russia, symbols of artificial, not move quickly. The theories and shots of years since moves not the theory mostly questioning of the stakeholder continues process, the nature of theories and also implication for formulations of license and mobilization versus the circumstances change the conception of a CC framework. The role of Aspen for the debate, the best form of methodology, Russian with suppression with the political institution front origin within European philosophy society brings the bond sexually backness, indigenous to Latina towards the sense sacrifice meaning opposition to whiteness, supercharged sociological architecture, which is sovereign ability to side Latinx ones going on constantly a little bit drawing section that's market to a some of the one with the contrary priest how so amount of institutional ratio the council of arsenal considered social a racial culture signify produce person not the universality race attribute European international category of identified female to justify exclusion philosophical orange drive from the representation of humanity is led with the bond savage represent capacity rationality with living with the concept of the bloody savage mentioned is unfit for citizenship as well blackness indigenous or marriage that racial signifiers along with lieutenant native on legal military apparatus necessary to uplift the bloody savage these origins with the law manifest within recent campus of border boundaries border militarization capacity of stateship as natural economic expedition resistance sociological architecture of law and this debate is about debate. So yes, give us about this. 3.8. My words can't change the debate. They can't change the loss of country and acronym metaphor. Contemporaries win losses are cataloged. Ballots represent the conclusion debate. Reviewers argue the impacts that happens with resistance about the ballots most significant tool influences the of the community. The face competition critical arena attempts to communicate that racism is the lead actually United States to not acknowledge debate replicates those values. The problem comes that we recognize those issues and do nothing. They hold teams accountable for choices that debate persecution, forcing other teams just to consider traditional ways of engaging competition rules and activity hostile to other bodies. Another theory project is explains the formation of economic expedition results manifested through border forms of border racialization. This Marcus so West Lafayette Latino immigrants start to the borders. We compare capital exploitation theorization, increase in death related manifestation complex matrix power interfaces through the ways of the border system racialized within the border of the United States is not conditioned with mere consequence of the economic exploitation. Expendability represents the base in which economic exploitation can be instantiated, and students live in a preconditioned ontological position where restricts their access to the activity. Ignoring this only creates a problem. That's mere 20. Debate privileges white participatory material access and communicator trustability ordinance rights access to resources and to become super color and small potential lives UDOs lost within predetermined frame by unsocial standard awareness and intersectional privileges with economic wealth in education policies use coupling narratives academic sound students expression of classical literacy practices rights norms of other students microphones these include the United States from the United States as benevolent actor and the reject cap root cause that's James Quinn. There's danger which all encompassing identity comes to play as powerful causes that capitalism has done yields an anti-analysis of ineffectual policies that it's since alternates and not hiding this just hack from me. The best way to combat border imperialism is to put people of color trying to fight it at the former. That's continuing 15. Process of mobilizing by organized recognition, martial community oppressive with leadership impacted by border imperialism. These principles experienced by assumed accountability and produce intervention attend to complex experiences of communities, role, intellectuals due to colonization, process questioning, position, and relationship centering produces and actors possible to community be practice, racial relation building, politics knowledgeable cannot be understood through settler colonialism because racism is space beyond border within itself. When multiple bodies meet at the borderlands, there's multiple temporalities to create possibilities of life beyond the settler colonial present. I think yeah, that's fine. I'm good for 6.
Cool. Good. Let's talk about the role of the ballot. What does it mean to rupture linguistic oppression within debate?
Yeah, it's to vote for the best, whether performative or methodological strategy that unsettles white spaces that are in the context of like
okay, how do we compare between two means of unsettling white spaces?
We would do that via their like how good of a method they are. So in the instance of the app, we depend on Mestiza.
Sure, gotcha. So what does Mestiza consciousness look like, and like I guess can you give me examples of like particular manifestations of it?
Yeah, so the mirror evidence in the advocacy, the Meritoni evidence in the advocacy gives examples of how students and debaters and teachers use performative and linguistic literacy practices as a form of transferring scholarship from one person to another. That's what the misuse approach to teaching and learning is. It's not just Spanish, but in fact, like any form.
Gotcha. So
that's a method that we defend. That's the model we want.
Okay, so it's teaching forms of understanding that are, I guess, internal to marginalized peoples, correct?
Yep.
Okay, cool. What does sort of voting for that in this debate do to sort of further the Mestiza approach to teaching and learning?
Okay, yeah, so it's not only this debate, but every debate as per the Reed-Brinkley evidence, but I think this debate could be uniquely good.
Gotcha. Actually, yeah, I have a question about that in particular. Your evidence says that the Mestiza approach is sort of an ongoing thing that happens. So I guess how many times do you need to vote for your AF? How, like, sort of what needs to be done to achieve Mestiza consciousness and sort of resolve the harms that seem to be very terminal, either way that sort of institutional discrimination happens?
Yeah, I guess like this is not like we don't have like a particular like read this 37 times in round and then like we achieve our goal in mind, but instead like I decided I'd make the commitment to read this all throughout my career. Gotcha. And I think that's like reading it through my career.
So what's the role of debate within the Mestiza approach / rupturing linguistic oppression? How does it sort of cultivate the forms of education your arguments are talking about?
So I guess like the role of debate should be more of like the role of what the judge and what the debater should do. Obviously, we say that the role of them should just be to adopt their strategy since it's a good idea.
Okay, so what's the role of the neg beyond just like, I guess, conceding to the AF?
Proven why Mestiza approach to teaching and learning is bad, I guess.
Gotcha, cool. Where does like anything within the AF say that contestation between sort of competing advocacies for rupturing linguistic oppression is good? Your argument just seems to be like linguistic oppression is bad.
Well, obviously, like we're not gonna, or like, okay, so obviously like that's just like how debate works, right? Obviously, gotcha. You should probably adopt our app.
Sure. But so contestation is, to be clear, contestation is necessary to sort of form the strategies you're talking about.
Well, yes, but here's the thing. The app takes a stance that the contestation intrinsic to debate right now, which is that of like largely policy debates, is bad. We need a new form of contestation, which is that of the Mestiza teaching.
Starting prep. For 40 left, the order is the case, or sorry, too often the case, starting on the hack for me thing, then the framework, then the Reed-Brinkley evidence. So I guess it's just an extension of the framework, and then the AF top down. One second. It is sent. Just let me know when everyone's good.
All set.
Yeah, I'm good.
Good. All right, cool. Sorry, let me record. Actually, it's recording, so. Well, no, I can still cut out. Never mind. First off, interpretation from a solely gain offense between the value of policy by which states live in lethal toss weapons. The negative should gain offense and gain that proposal resolved implies an action of law. Words and phrases C4 resolve similar to the word enactment meaning to establish by law. No, I mean, say definitely for much with debating LAWs. One, switch side debate defending how you didn't force, you didn't pick force you to question your assumptions of understanding your principal perspective. That's value for knowing portal souls, jihad, racism in the real world, and check confirmation rise grade by solely defending your theory. It also sort of constituted debate, which is conceded by cross-examination, where they said that's sort of how debate operates. Two, limits there leaves no rule for the negative. The Afghan defend anything so possible for superior response. Rex and testing methods makes for interesting one of these, but terrible debates. Ask yourself, what sort of role is there for contesting vestige of consciousness when the explanation is just like a form of learning that incorporates marginalized people, testing out ways A, necessary to determine if the true insofar as it wasn't subject to rigorous conversation because we didn't know what it defended. You should presumptively assume to be false because it wasn't subject to rigorous conversation. B, class results into identifying shared premises and deliberating to find the best strategy. Cross by debate can get impacts resulting in the development of strategies to protect marginalized bodies. Jordy, at 18, the technical takes repeated encounters to harsh collective agency, unconscious with a role framework ideology to secret for theorizing case attention to what works in a tradition of intolerance alongside the general check of the US tax. First, the community's moral economy, technical forms confront capital and the bonds of social relations strategy and long-term goals. Taxes are means to advance, test, analyze the game where political relation to make moves and counter moves and people close to what access to can do and reason for actions focus on processes by which involve trade-offs and accept that the police counter movements to make their interests necessarily structural context. The reflexive understanding of technical strategy means underdeveloped. C, the F still believes debate can cultivate some good ends even if its traditional form fails, but any model of debate assumes the negative contesting the affirmative independently results in the F defending uncontested positions like I should have a space in debate or like learning should incorporate marginalized people like their F does, which forces us to negate people's identity and results in psychological violence. Voting should be actively exclusionary for certain people. 3, topical version of the F. LAWs are the embodiment of militarism buildup and expansion, and their Marquez evidence says that militarism is sort of used as a means of eliminating savagery, which oppresses regional minorities like Mexican people, defending an elimination of them as a means of challenging logical militarization, which spills over into culture and resulting in sort of changes the way that we police the border / behavior of Latinx people would be a sort of public lap under your interpretation. It might not be a perfect act. There's a reason why there's negative ground in the world. To my interpretation, T is dropped beta question legitimacy of it, and the app should the question of legitimacy of what the app should have been read. Answer advocacy about anything else we separate from text. Contestation, no RBI impact turns are often precludes debating about which method is best since the debate becomes about punishment for reading theory, being interested for they would discuss my model if they don't probably the value of an alternative model. Those decisions are terminally unique. Second off, interpretation from aspects for single action taken by a single actor. Clarify the actor doesn't have to be VSG and actually doesn't have to be a policy violation. It's unclear what the staff advocates for. What does vestige of consciousness look like? There are so many possible manifestations, all of which they can claim offense from, which means that they're sort of like I mean that they tried to trick into the act, which is like the singular action. Singular actor is the judge, and the singular action is vestige of consciousness. Doesn't make sense because vestige of consciousness is so much. It's such a wide range of potential actions. One, Stacey said, mutually agreed upon topic means there's no common understanding their advocacy. A singular actionable definition is key to a stable basis for offense. Any model will center on something to enable interpretation. Cross by the impact from above. 2, causalities that debating causal links between specific actions and their effects, be them on social systems or otherwise, creates portable tools and predicting how active strategy will prove catch and formulating strategies for most effectively bring about redress. 3, topical version of the activating against the vestige consciousness. For example, a specific thing that Mexican debaters should do when debating the topic and why that's good would solve your offense. Cross by the voter from above. The case, starting on the hack from me stuff. 1, it delegitimizes you. It's just sort of your strategy is sort of seen as an excuse to get ballots for a marginalized people, which means that it sort of delegitimizes your movement and calcifies racist debaters' views, which sort of results in more material exclusion of people. 2, it means there's no contestation because we never have an incentive to engage in the sort of competitive enterprise of debate because you'll just sort of know that someone is going to vote for you, which means you never have any productive debates, which they conceded is necessary. And if that's true, then there isn't any purpose to having debate in the first place. 3, it doesn't put people of color at front. The only thing that sort of this round determines is the sort of the pre-roll record of the next debate, which doesn't have terminal impact on putting people of color at the front, which sort of is trivializing actual forms of oppression and ways to solve them. Now, the frame. The rule of values for the bus positive literature for marginalized people. 1, it's a logical change to just linguistic oppression. How does that explain gender pay gaps in the workforce or institutional intellect? It proves their framework results in ignoring other forms of violence, even if this particular form of violence matters. 2, T operates on a higher layer, even if they're in the concept of advocacy should rupture linguistic oppression. The question is whether the form of their advocacy to do that was legitimate. 3, probability their inherent with Western linguistic structures means they probably can't rupture their oppressive nature, but debate can create skills that can enable students to advocate outside of rounds. 4, how do we compare between performative ruptures of linguistic oppression? Even if it's a good model, it's impossible to use, so default to ours. Their argument is just like we determine which one is like good, but that doesn't really explain how you compare between them and sort of metrics for evaluation, which means that doesn't make sense. Now the Brinkley evidence. Don't grant them the ballot. 1, either their thesis about linguistic of the Western linguistic categories and debate is correct, so re-injecting the F into it via the ballots is for option, or it is wrong, which means that it's terminal case defense. 2, they're voting for their advocacy delegitimizes revolutionary potential. Ritter. 13, social change through debate abuses the win-loss structure and permits debaters to humanize opponents, but debate whereas just this precludes compromise. Social change encourages the narrative in which the other team is evil and create exclusionary dichotomy to make sense of personal attack by excluding for winning. It makes compromise much less likely. 3, the Brinkley evidence proper. It's unclear how it necessarily changes the state of debate. People have been reading apps like this for decades, and nothing has sort of structurally changed about the debate. They've read evidence that the debate still structurally favors certain debaters, which is evidence of how voting for them won't sort of really manifest in doing anything. But the reason why debate is exclusionary isn't a reason to vote for them, because I already answered the hacking stuff above. Now the case on the top down. Yeah, cool. The chamber of evidence, they say that debate's performative, but that's not what the card is talking about. It's talking about how law has values inscribed to it, which is an example of how the TVA can't solve, because it proves that being consistent with sort of values like message of conscience or expressing anti-militaristic sentiment via laws can be consistent with the method of linguistic oppression, which proves the topical version of the act. The arguments of how inequality ends up inside the classroom aren't things that their act can solve, because just voting for them won't change the sort of material ways that their impacts manifest, which is you can vote negative on presumption or any risk of topicality, often because it's terminal like case statements and the unique everyone's linked. Now, the method, the one is gesture and emancipatory form of living by message of conscience of institutional responsibility for balance, Wilson, negotiation, and Gemini Chandler. 7, no time to build a collective movement. It would seem important to debate causes solution. Activism stays a form of social disengagement. Angels giving political meaning to every personal action. This lack of shared goals, desire to act with that close strategy has led to destabilizing interventions. Focusing on mandatory forms of living, we have to around the research theory questions based on what the choice best as individuals, then how theory might be used to engage the world. 2, the move to embody politics within debate or adopt endurance strategies right now is shut down as soon as it get large enough to affect institutions. Vote negative on presumption or risk of any of our offense. Like and willingness to freedom. The pre-free gesture to embody the future world immediately change our ways that we're relating to each other. They aim to enact the space. These spaces are temporary, and I equals radical change. Prefigure spaces require logistical sports. These applications were permitted to do this because the capital does not see them as threat. The moment a prefigure space becomes a threat as the moment repression weighs down on it. Them pausing and practicing a new world is insufficient to overcome these forces of repression faced by occupy demonstrate. 3, what does it mean to endorse message of consciousness? What do we do? If the answer post 1AC is sort of just like we challenge borders, we teach things like Spanish and other forms of literacy, and you don't really know all the things that could possibly encompass, because there are so many possible things that that could sort of involve teaching that your battle can't do, then A, don't create the one new explanation because the text 1AC strategy, and B, vote negative because you don't know what the app does, which is impossible to debate it. 4, their entire assault section is performative, such about our individual micropolitical endorsement of that doesn't do anything. People have been reading arguments like this for decades, which was explained above. Cool. I have 44 seconds left. I will send this card after. This is taking a while. Cool. No, never mind. I read everything. Cool. Yeah, I'm good for cross-sex.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go to the second off. So I have to advocate for a single action by a single actor.
Yeah.
So like obviously I put the line in the app that was like the actor is a judge, the action is the misuse of persecution.
Well, like so let me, I guess, to put it in a different context to explain why this doesn't make sense. Take an example where the app advocates for like 2 plans. The judge would still be voting. They'd be doing a single thing, right? They'd be like taking the singular action as a singular actor. If like
how does the app 2 plans though? It's just.
But they're still defending multiple plans. The point is that your advocacy is still multiple things, because like even setting cross-sex, it's not just teaching Spanish. It could be incorporating different forms.
Okay, a plan text can entail. Okay, hold on. A plan text can entail multiple actions. For example, banning lethal autonomous weapons could entail multiple different people banning lethal autonomous weapons.
Like
multiple different things. Hold on, I'm not done. Lethal autonomous weapons can also be more than one thing. How is that different from?
Okay,
like,
so I guess another example might be necessary. Let's say like baking a cake. You need to like stir and like heat up and stuff, but the ultimate action you're taking is baking a cake. I think we intuitively know that like certain things are singular actions.
Okay.
They involve other things.
The app is ultimate action is for debate to embrace the Mestiza approach to teaching and learning. It's clearly delineated by
the app is the thing is the point is that Mestiza consciousness.
That's our cake, right? Like how is that? How is that 2 cakes? We want 1 cake, right? And we've told you in the mirror evidence. How is that 2 cakes?
Well, no. I mean, the point is like Mestiza consciousness is not an action. It's sort of a broader method and way of approaching the world, right? So it's not I guess 1 cake to use. The
Mestiza approach to teaching. Okay. Let's go down to your TVA. Defend a specific instance of the Mestiza approach to teaching and learning, right? How is it?
So if you said
Mestiza consciousness, like, how is that 1 instant, or how is that not 1 instance?
So I guess this can also illustrate the difference. If you said like we should teach like Spanish to like everyone, it's like compulsory or something like that. If you thought that was consistent with Mestiza consciousness, that could be an example.
Okay, how is only teaching Spanish better for like engagement?
Well, it's not so much like that particular advocacy, but the idea of defending a particular advocacy that is a singular action, and the NED can then explain why that might be a bad idea, why that might re-ingrain certain racialized tropes, so on and so forth, would enable the full conversation that your app currently does not.
The case stuff, the framework. So you see the rule about to vote for the best positive liberatory strategy. Is T framework a positive liberatory strategy?
The point is more so like the question is like what our advocacy should look like. My argument is the form of
my question is T framework a positive liberatory strategy?
our argument is that it creates the skills, or that sort of debating about policies creates the skills for forwarding positive strategies outside this.
If the app says that those skills, that sort of policy is inaccessible to people of color in debate because they're judged when they engage in those sort of systems, how is
they don't
that?
necessarily have to be legal strategies, right? They like it can still be things that are consistent with the sort of.
Okay, so your world ballot, it's not only in the context of like LARP. It can also be other things. Can also be
the point is that those skills can be used for various things, right? So it might be like having topical debates, but that creates skills that can be explored beyond
that. Gotcha. I have 5 minutes. Starting now. Okay, stop time 2:11. Let me just write that down. Okay, the order is going to be the case. So it'll be overview and extensions on the case, and then the line by line of like, I guess the cards, and then it'll be the line by line of the like the stuff that they wrote in the doc, and then the like second shell, then the first shell. Oh wait, actually, I forgot to do something. Sorry, 2:11. Start prep now. Okay, sorry, 139 left. Yeah, so the order would be AF overview, and then line by line, then the second shell, then the first shell. Let me know when everyone's good. Okay, Evan's good.
Yeah, there's no doc, right?
No.
Cool. I am good.
Okay. Overview: the role of ballot is to rupture linguistic oppression within debate. Debate renders Latino as bloody savages to British European battle of political and rational thinking. This results in linguistic necropolitics in debate. Thus, the Marcus and Parker evidence voting app endorses the misuse of consciousness. Debate can be structured to generate social energizing planning for the borderlands through neo-linguistic practices. Vote app because of our performance. The chamber lesson 13 evidence is performative. All proves that all arguments have ether species performance that determines the direction of people's liberalities, which means that form must come before content. And imagine as a police officer tells you to turn around. You're not turning around because he tells you to turn around. You're turning around because it is a police officer, which proves that performance and form impacts people's liberalities and has the most material consequences, which means that you should prioritize the arguments prior to everything. The law you see the chamber's lesson is in the context of laws having value. No, it's in the context of laws causing sort of ethos that means form should come over content, which answers back your TVA argument. You see that we won't solve. Here's the thing: we'll wreck you on presumption. Overview to all the presumption arguments. Presumption is bullshit. They claim that LARP debate causes material change, but ignore the real reality of debaters. Voting for LARP does nothing but a form script of centralism. So stop acting like you have a competitively better strategy. One point is crossed by the breed book evidence. Reading the stat changes the way judges judge around, and debaters engage speaking the arguments where possible, increases people's incentive to explore the literature and adopt the strategy. Second, it's crossed with mirror evidence. Debaters around the country have already adopted the app, which means that it's possible to do in college change. Takes up the arguments. It's a risk of offense versus risk of mitigatory defense, which answers back a cluster of your arguments. So a rule of proper conceding it should be the best liberatory strategy or whatever, that just collapses to ours because it proves that the best liberatory strategy is what the app is. They have not offered a competing one, which means that you should just default in terms of substantive. All of the arguments. First is that it proves that form should come over content, which means that you should prioritize that form of liberatory strategy as proven by yourself independently. T does not outweigh will be proven like on the T show, which answers back that our specific argument. The third argument is not a presumption. Like our presumption hedge takes out like your third and fourth argument. The ballot arguments proper. You say that we reinject things, but here's the thing: it's not co-option. And on the A point of like the ballot, they said it's not co-option because the Messiah for institutional learning is able to solve, which answers back the Ritter evidence is answered by the read brief evidence because it proves that embracing the ballot embraces people's incentive to explore the literature, which answers back your argument. You say it gives institutions power, but no, we are political. We allow for things like political engagement, which answers back the institutional power argument. That's what the mirror evidence is talking about. You say it shuts down a student's permit gets big on the next piece of evidence, but no, the Figali evidence answers back. It's not shut down because it's able to adopt in around things like obstacles, etc. That's what misuse of consciousness teaching learning is, and that's what misuse of consciousness is, which answers back that argument. The third point, you say that what is misuse of consciousness? I've already defined it, which answers back the argument. This is just a question, not an argument. You say that our solvency is performative. Even if it is performative, it's still very material, as because we've proven that like performance is material, and even if it isn't, we still have a good material strategy that is not performative, which is the misuse of teaching and learning, the other shell. Overview: I meet like their second shell proper. The one specific actor is a judge, and the one specific action is the misuse opposed to teaching and learning. This is the topical version of the app that is a subset of misuse of consciousness. This was given in TX and it was given in the app, which means that you obviously vote for, which means I obviously meet the shell independently. Usual reasonability with the bright line of contestation with this argument proves that you're able to contest that sort of specific strategy. One point is anything else is respectability politics. And it means that debaters will always be held to a higher standard than they're able to achieve, which leads to things like infinite exclusion. Solves your stasis argument because it proves that the topic I propose is debatable, and solves causality because a complex topic leads to more things that clashes, which answers back your argument. T. Counterinterval different violation. Counterinterval debaters can garner performative offense. One point is valid proximity. You can't control whether or not the resolution is implemented, but you can't reject or accept ethical performance. Because performance is jurisdictional question. You can't evaluate anything else. Second is theories of linguistic exclusion. Partially the mirror evidence. The way debate essentially is wrong priority and request by association not industry are being pushed out of the activity. Seventh question: the rest of the system is structural for people. Which means that theory is the worst form of affairs. Fourth, the topic fails. Or third is the topic fails. Fourth, in the resolution division ground will always bracket out people unable to access topical research without judgment. This always since it hijacks the limits often and is proven by our Mia evidence. Students live in a precondition, also condition for a reason, and your theory shall only proliferates that, which leads to exclusion. I love the argument. Social debate argument. One point is that people always read one of your theory, which distracts from the literature. Second is that it won't solve because you will force people of color to learn is specifically violent for them because they can't engage in the structure, which means that social debate is violent. Limits is one point is that you can just answer the framework portion of the we get to the case. One point is that you can just answer the framework portion of the affirmative, not specific advocacy. That's what we're using to wait. Second is that disclosure. The second argument is that you should be able to test your form testing and answer back all your arguments independently. The typical version of the app. One point is that you won't solve the form section of the app, which is what we're going for. Which means that any sort of post-fiat sort of topical debate forces people of color to engage in a bad structure. It won't solve like the form section of the app, which means it can't solve the app.
I have 440 left. Cool. Starting now. The order is the second shell with an overview, then the line by line, then the first shell, and then the case page on the framework.
Good whenever it else is.
I am reading some like pre-written analytics. I will just send these in the chat. Yeah, cool. Just let me know when everyone is good. David, you're good? All
right. Yeah, I'm good.
I will consider the form of these concept. The thesis of the 2 is that the form of the affirmative is illegitimate, which means you should reject it. I'm going for the second interpretation that the affirmative must defend a single action by a singular actor. That means that advocacies that are topical in my interpretation. 1, an advocacy that bans lethal autonomous weapons. That's a specific action because it's taken by a particular actor, for example, a government, and then it sort of does a particular thing, i.e., it sort of eliminates lethal autonomous weapons by saying that they're sort of not allowed. 2 is that the fiating that we would teach Spanish to sort of all people in K-12 schools. That is a singular action because it is, even if it is sort of consistent with message consciousness and teaching marginalized form of education, it is still consistent with the ideology of taking a particular action. 3 is, for example, in the case of a different like race-based affirmative, saying that we should eliminate all police, that would still be an example of a singular action taken by a governmental actor. The affirmative is just the farthest thing from that, which is that even if there's some ambiguity, there isn't in this case. They say that mestiza consciousness has multiple implications in process when they say that it isn't necessarily just teaching Spanish, but sort of an overall process of learning. Their evidence says that it's a continuous process that we are constantly engaging in, and there are so many examples of how it's sort of a general orientation towards learning, but it isn't a sort of particular action by a particular actor, which means it doesn't meet the spirit of my interpretation. Speech should come before text. You shouldn't be. Their arguments are that sort of the law and using particular text to exclude people is bad. That's sort of the entire thesis of the act, which means it would be performed double turn for them to contest that, and it's sort of a question of sort of the terminal impact. I'm going for both the nexus they were both conceded. First is a Stacy's point. It's necessary to have a particular place where the negative can clash. I.e., we can say that this particular advocacy, for example, saying that we should teach Spanish in all schools, is a bad example of trying to alter racialization because, for example, Spanish is sort of the language of the colonizers and came from Europe. Those sort of particular debates can't happen in a general debate about mestizo consciousness because we don't know what the affirmative means, which you can cross by the sort of presumption argument from the case page here. Their argument is that it is specific enough. I disagree, and there isn't really enough one explanation to warrant that claim, which is that there's zero risk of a form of offense and being able to leverage it against the Happy page because you don't know what the affirmative does, which means you don't know what you're voting for, and therefore it can't garner external offense. I'll extend the reasons why a Stacy's point and sort of meaningful contestation happened on the second page, on the second T page. Second is the causality. Is that they've also conceded this, analyzing the causal links between sort of particular actions and their effects is sort of a meaningful way of understanding how activism works, how the particular plans that we form are sort of able to challenge material institutions. Anything else means we aren't able to build souls are able to transcend beyond this space. That always their offense. 1 is magnitude. They're the only way that we can do what we do here can immediately impact people outside those most marginalized power structures. And 2 is duration, but lead the activity, but we can always advocate for changing in communities we enter in college and life. Now, the line by line, they first say they speak because their action is mestizo consciousness. I've already explained why that is not a particular action. And they say that the one actor is the judge. But no, this would justify like the AF reading 3 plans and you being like it's one action because one judge is making one decision. Obviously, it's a question of the advocacy that you're advocating for. My argument is that advocacy is not by a singular actor because so many possible people could implement mestizo consciousness. Your argument is just that mestizo consciousness generally is a good thing. The next argument is this reasonability thing. You don't meet your bright line. We sort of barely could test your arguments. We had a few like sort of case cards and then just like T-shells, which obviously proves that there was not any meaningful place for contestation, and there's no bright line for what constitutes meaningful contestation. You should reject reasonability independently. It's arbitrary and begs the question of what constitutes legitimate forms of contestation, or which means it sort of it depends on what the judge's internal bright line is, which is arbitrary and self-serving and results in certain debaters being disadvantaged. For example, sort of marginalized people because it sort of relies on internal judges' perceptions who are disproportionately white males. Now the line by line, they see respectability politics. You're not held to a higher standard. Every single plan app is held to the exact same standard that you defend a single action. You are held to that same standard. You just can advocate for things with different content, which is proven by the TVA, where we said you could defend a specific instance of mestizo consciousness, which is explained above. The final argument is that it leads to clash. My argument is that clash doesn't happen over the particular effects of particular actions because your app is so sort of general and vague, which means they can't cultivate the forms of revolutionary practice that are good, which outweighs their offense. Now, the other shell. They can see the impact turns are a reason to reject the shell, not a reason to reject the debater, because anything else means we can't have meaningful debate about sort of what forms of engagement are good routines. These aren't offense, but I'm going to answer them anyway. They see theory is violent. One is that we have to have some restraints for what constitutes legitimate contestation. For example, their framework says that our advocacy should be oriented towards challenging linguistic oppression, which means there will always be some restraint on what constitutes legitimate advocacy, and theory is just a means of demarcating that, which is not sort of independently violent. Two is that opposition is inevitable. You will either have to face it within debate or outside of it. It's better to learn how to sort of contest that and beat it back within debate, which means that sort of this is sort of offense for us. Three is that it's a reason to get better at answering it. It's not a reason why theory is independently violent or a form of exclusion. It's just a reason why you need to justify why your model of debate is a good thing, which means it doesn't lead to any of the offense. It doesn't push anybody out of the activity or sort of exclude people who can't access it. There's no reason why they wouldn't why other people wouldn't be able to read law crafts. And I'm not defending the interpretation of a top class. I will concede that maybe sort of the law is inaccessible towards people. That's just a reason why you have to defend single action by single actor, which doesn't necessarily need to be a state policy which solves their offense. They're only cool. I'll send the contestation stuff here. They can see the Johari evidence that said that it's necessary to develop liberatory strategies, having a sort of a central point for contestation. For example, sort of contesting a particular advocacy means we're able to understand the intricacies of institutions, so we can effectively break them down long term. Anything else means we don't have the sort of nuanced revolutionary knowledge to be able to explore the strategy beyond the states, which is that even if we talk about linguistic oppression within debate, it never leads to sort of any change outside of it, which always their offense on duration. The case page. Cool. Three arguments on the framework question. First is that topicality comes on a higher layer. Even if the debate is about liberatory strategy, about challenging linguistic oppression, the question is whether the way that they did that is necessarily a good thing, which always on duration is necessary for sort of establishing norms and ways of dealing within the activity. They're able to cultivate debates about liberatory strategies that can then be exported outside of it. Their argument is just that it doesn't outweigh because we're going to answer the shell, but that means that if we won the shell, then we have won that operates on a higher layer. Two is that voting AF does nothing. They conceded that there isn't necessarily sort of an impact to voting AF. It's just a question of whether advocacy is a good idea. People have been reading arguments like this for decades, and it hasn't structurally changed the nature of debate, which is proven by their arguments that debate is still sort of structurally skewed towards certain people, which is evidence of why the question should just be which advocacy is good or bad, which means that the question of whether your AF is a legitimate advocacy to read debate is obviously a legitimate one. Three is that you shouldn't grant them valid extend the writer evidence. It says that it results in dehumanization because when debaters believe that you are sort of winning because of the identity category that you believe that you subtract to, or sort of are exempting yourself from a particular rule or practice, it means that they will sort of dehumanize you and consider it an illegitimate way of competing, which results in sort of the calcification of racist views and results in more material exclusion of debaters, which is the highest internal link the terminal impact is causes an sort of actual material harm, but there's no sort of material impact to voting after or roasting the siege of conscience. Their argument is that it creates an incentive to explore the literature, but you generally don't have it. People lose the case all the time. They don't go and like learn how to become K debaters. Obviously, it's more likely that they sort of become like anti-K and like LARP is the only legitimate form of education, which proves that there's no net benefit to voting after topicality comes on a higher layer, and they just functionally dropped a T-shell.
139, starting now. What was the second response to the impact turn? You said opposition's inevitable what?
Yeah, so it's better to learn how to sort of beat that back within debate than sort of insulate ourselves.
To learn how to beat what back?
To sort of beat back restraints on particular advocacies within debate.
Okay. Okay, the order is going to be the case, then framework, then the I guess. Consider the role of balance to rupture linguistic oppression within debate. Debate renders the treated as bloody savages to produce the European model of political and rational thinking. There is social role in linguistic necropolitics in debate. That's the Marcus and harder evidence. Very after from the university supports teaching and learning. The mere evidence explains how debate can be structured to educators embracing multicultural linguistic practices as a form of debate. This evidence is specific to debate, which supercharges insolvency. Here is our actor. The judge is the actor, just like the United States federal government, but the judge. The debate is a microcosm of the real world. The judge would be the United States federal government, and our plan is the mestizo approach to teaching and learning, which is a subset of mestizo consciousness. It can't get clearer than that. Concession of our performance is game over. Consider Chambers' lesson, which proves up form comes over content. Here's an example: a police officer tells you to turn around. You don't turn around because someone random is telling you to turn around. You're turning around because it's a freaking police officer telling you to turn around. That proves that form dictates all persons' lived realities, which form comes over content. And even if they win the content of the material shell, it's a good idea. Consider the form of the one you see is a good idea, which has more of a material change than anything else. It answers back not only answers back the presumption arguments on case, but also proves that AC outweighs that T shell. This is the only sort of medical avoiding that's done in debate, which means that you auto but on the performance, which was considered all unbalanced from the arguments on case. The presumption overview was that you do not have a competing substantive strategy that's able to do better than the app. You say that LARPing is better, but that doesn't do jack shit for people of color who are being shoved out of the debate space right now. This is the most material strategy what our evidence talks about, which means that top level framing issue, we just have way better solvency than all of your arguments. We'll still answer some claim. You see that voting app does nothing. You can see the evidence that says that it changes the way judges debate and people engage because it allows people to engage in the literature and believe in the strategy even more. The Ritter also answers back the Ritter evidence because this Ritter evidence is just an assumption of what people will think of the app, but you've considered evidence of what the app actually materially does, i.e. the Louisville projects and stuff like that would consider material solvency, which answers back to stuff. The last thing is that you say that people will become more anti-K or whatever. Like, here's the thing: people might become more anti-K or whatever, but that just means some more rigorously tested strategies, which means that the app would probably be a net better. Also proves contestation is possible with non-T affirmatives, which answers and it's like a net benefit to what our argument on the other show, the like T framework proper. Not going for the arguments on T framework, going for the army, but a few key issues here. First is that consider that for like form comes over content. The second argument is that the Doherty evidence says like skills, etc. is needed to test a strategy, but you consider the turn where it says that those skills are inaccessible absent the affirmative because people of color will not be able to engage in this sort of spaces. That's what the Harker and Muir student ontology analysis is, which means that there's no net benefit to your inter absent the app. Independently, we'll answer go to the theoretical proper. Here's how we meet the app. Our actor is you as a judge, and our subset and our particular action is the Matisse approach to teaching and learning. Here's the thing: there's sort of competing interests. Argument justifies text over spirit because anything else results in the judge's internal biases, etc. Which means that our sort of like meeting the shell, whatever. It's not. We don't need to win competing or reasonability or whatever. But if we meet the shell, then there's no reason you vote on the shell proper. That proves that we have to meet like the specific text of your shell, and we'll read it. We'll read like the text of your shell proper. The affirmative must have for a singular action taken by a singular specific actor. The singular action is embracing the Matisse approach to teaching and learning by voting out by the judge, which means that textually we meet your shell independently. Any proves that we are able to engage because you can argue whether performance is good or bad, etc. That sort of debate is possible independently. Your sort of example about a police officer being eliminated by one actor is no different, or lethal autonomous weapons. Lethal autonomous weapons are multiple things, and states are multiple different things. So it's illogical if the app is different from that.
Good debate.
Good debate.
All right, are you both ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so I ended up voting negative on the second theory shell about actor action specificity. Okay, here is how I break this down. So first issue that is advanced by the AF is this argument that form should come before content. That's gone for the TOR as well. I think the negative responds to this effectively when they say their T argument, the second one in particular, is a question of form. It criticizes the form of the AF. And if their argument about how the AF should have been formulated is preferable, that would be a criticism of the AF on those terms. And so I don't think that's a reason to exclude the T debate. The T debate is a question over what form the AF method sort of should be implemented within. So I think it takes on those same characteristics that you talk about with the form over content arguments. So now it comes down to the violation. Both of you frame this as sort of text versus spirit issue, which I don't think it necessarily is. It's almost like an interpretation, like a correct interpretation of the text issue here. I do think the neg's explanation of what it means for something to be a singular policy is one that coheres with my intuitions, and in particular coheres with the standards that are given for the shell, which makes it, I think, the logical interpretation of what is meant by a singular action. A singular action is not just a single thing you're describing, but a set of actionable items that could be the basis of a discussion of causality, for example, or a stable starting point for debate. So saying that in embracing this Matisse consciousness, my plan is Matisse learning is not an action. It is, again, a bucket that could contain a set of actions that is undefined by the terms of the F. So it's similar to saying, I embrace critical pedagogy, and my action is that teachers should engage in critical pedagogy, but what actual things they do in the classroom, that is open to contestation, even within people who embrace them, between people who embrace the method, and therefore can't be a stable basis for debate. So the negative brings up the, at some point, either in cross-ex or the first speech, right, the idea that you have the ability to say, well, that in particular thing that you criticize is not what I actually endorse. I endorse these other parts of Matisse learning. So I don't think the F, as stated, would meet the single action component. From there, I think the actual advantages of the interpretation are not dealt with particularly well. The stasis point and causality arguments in particular, I think are just, like, I think, very solid arguments for why we could engage in the form of discussion and consciousness that the AF talks about in a way that would be beneficial in the way the AF talks about, but still allow for debatability in a way that is more productive for activism. So I think those arguments cohere for me. I think a way, yeah. So I think that's ultimately how I vote. Do you guys have any questions? I'm sure you do.
How do you think I could, like, I'm probably never gonna debate anyone, so thank you for judging.
Yeah, no problem. I thought this was a very, very good debate, by the way. So congratulations to you both on that. Good luck going forward. Yeah. If you want any advice on, like, what you may have done differently or how you can improve, feel free to ask, shoot me an email, whatever.
Yeah, I think I have an idea. I realized that. Yeah, thank you for judging.
Yeah, no problem.
I've never been judged by you, so do you disclose speaks?
I don't disclose speaks.
Okay.
I will let you know right now, my speaks are generally lower than most people. So if you see something you're like, oh no, I did terribly, doesn't necessarily mean you did terribly. I just do have a slightly harsher scale, and I apologize for that.
No, you're good. Thank you.
Yep.
It's probably more legitimate.
Yeah.
All right.
Good luck.